Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we are finally going to be talking about the newest album from Perfume Genius called No Shape. So there's a certain critical preconception about singer-songwriters that the more layers of instrumentation that they add, the less intimate their music is perceived. Now, this is more often observed on the flip side, that when artists strip things down, they're working to intensify the closeness and intimacy of their music. But I've always found it to be a little bit of a misconception, not really taking into account the music as a whole. Sure, when you strip things back to place all of that emphasis on that singer, you can get that intimacy for sure, providing of course your production's on point, but just because the instrumentation becomes lush or more expansive doesn't necessarily mean the focus has to change. You just need a performer who can captivate with those bigger emotions, that has the charisma and the stage presence in order to match the instrumentation in production. Enter Mike Hadreas, who sings under the moniker Perfume Genius. If you remember when I covered his absolutely incredible third album, Too Bright, back in 2014, I highlighted that despite being his most expansive record to date, he still managed to leverage his incredible intensity and charisma into a powerfully intimate experience, which is kind of stunning for me considering how much of that album was holding up a mirror to the audience to confront discomfort with Hadreas' open sexuality while actively confronting the insecurities projected upon him by society. It was a powerful step that might have eschewed the direct storytelling of previous records, especially Put Your Back Into It, but the combination of such rich themes, the potent vulnerability, and an incredible lead performance certainly won me over. It is one of the best records of 2014, and I stand by that. I revisit that album to this day. But what fascinated me was that instead of returning to raw, quieter material or going mainstream, Mike Hadreas was going bigger and grander. Buzz was suggesting that No Shape was a more baroque record with grand opulence in its tones and aiming for high decadence in its romance. And the second I started hearing comparisons to Kate Bush, I knew I had to find some way to muscle this up my schedule so I could finally talk about it. So no more wasting time, considering this review is late already. What did we get with No Shape? Alright, I gotta have some full disclosure here. There was a part of me that was conditioned to be pretty skeptical about this album, especially considering Hadreas had repeatedly shown that in more intimate spaces, he could make some stunning music, and especially if he was opting for softer material when going bigger, I was genuinely worried that it wouldn't be as interesting or as intense as Too Bright was. And while I'm still debating a little bit whether or not I like that album more, yeah, you know what? He did it again. No Shape is easily one of the best and most stunningly unique records of 2017. An album that deserves grand romantic language in order to describe it, and you could tell some critics got to flex those creative writing degrees putting together reviews for this album. But at its core, it still manages to hold an intimate grasp of its language and its presence, such that on some level it doesn't need all that grand exposition. The themes that it touches kind of transcends that language. And that's actually a perfect place to start with this review, tying into one of the biggest concerns that I actually had going into this record. The possibility that by going bigger and lighter and arguably more decadent, this album could possibly skid towards camp, which could do a disservice to the raw intensity that had previously anchored Hadreas' albums. And you know what? What's striking is that while this record does indulge in its moments of instrumental excess, the explosions of sudden chimes and heavenly choirs on Otherside, the swells of arranged strings and plucked elements, a filmy atmosphere that allows Hadreas' gorgeous falsetto to soar on songs like Just Like Love, the plucked waltz cadence on the brittle acoustics of Valley, they do feel grounded because at the core of the sound, it remains ragged and tight. Thrumming bass, either upright or electric, guitar tones that spark and smolder to supply a surprising amount of groove to songs that are aiming to soar, beats that shudder through unstable progressions like on Go Ahead, electric pianos on Die For You that I would swear picks up a tone that I would only ever describe as Arion-esque against the muffled guitars and stunning vocal overdubs, and it is amazing, and all with production that never feels like it's wallowing in all these exquisite tones. There is something grand and romantic about it, sure, but nothing here feels complacent or languid or lazy, mostly because a factor of the tempo that of tracks like Slip Away or the frenetic strings of Choir that lets the guitar seethe just enough in the background before the clanking sinking, shuddering in. Or especially Wreath, with that rock-solid melodic groove, especially in the lower guitar tones, that easily makes it one of the most distinctive and potent songs Hadreas has ever assembled, and probably one of my favorites of 2017. And what's telling is that Hadreas is also willing to take a step back and make those intricate songs feel organic and intimate all the same. The gorgeous touches of strings against the thrumming of upright bass on every night, the hints of cascading electric piano and plucks that hold together braid, and especially Alan, how it uses misty swell to end on a shared final moment and a shared final note that's more implied than stated. I'm normally not really much of a fan of that, but hell, it worked for me here. Hell, it's telling. The moment that feels the most garish is the collaboration with Blood called Sides, mostly that noisy, flattened riff that opens up the song before a deeper tap against the bass. It really does feel like two songs that are fused together a bit haphazardly, but it's also because Mike Hadreas is such a potent presence on this album, he doesn't need added accompaniment from another singer. I'm still a little bit in awe of this guy as a performer. He lets his voice tremble and crack and warble with natural vibrato, with multi-tracking that seems to accentuate his rougher edges rather than smooth them out, and yet for as raw and vulnerable as it can feel, he has such tremendous command of his atmosphere and his intensity on these songs. It is stunning. And what's incredible is that for as much as that intensity could overwhelm this material, could feel overstated, it never does. There's nothing here that feels overwrought or forced, just relying on a seemingly bottomless well of natural charisma that still feels human, that allows him to make a song about erotic asphyxiation actually kind of sound erotic. So yeah, might as well move into the content here. And again, like with Too Bright, thematically No Shape can be a little bit difficult to really parse out. It's kind of all over the place, partially because in contrast to some of the more ornate instrumentation, Mike Hadreas' writing is so straightforward and direct and arguably simple in its language. Another way this record avoids camp. But another part of this is linked to a distinctly spiritual angle that runs through the record right from the very beginning on Otherside, finding and understanding a connection that flits out of reach of any corporeal form, a connection that transcends a body with which Hadreas, who has suffered from Crohn's disease and addiction, has always struggled. And you know, it's a bit of a paradox, for as much as he strides forth to proclaim his security in his form in the face of any onlooker who would judge him by saying, "I'll pray for you" on Go Ahead, well, on Just Like Love, he encourages others to do the same. But then you get songs like Valley and Wreath show his desire to go beyond that body, transcend space and time. And yet, when he reaches out into that untold space on songs like Every Night and Choir, there's an insecurity in that unknown. Whether it be nothing in that darkness or something darker that he dare not really articulate, he recoils from it. And that's what's fascinating, is how certain themes of reconciliation with his human body return on the second half of this album. Some things that were brought up on Too Bright and come back here. Side show him playing the role of his boyfriend, pleading for him to come down back to earth, while Natalie Marling of Blood takes his part, highlighting the conflicting but very human questions and insecurities that still rage within him despite his desire to transcend. And there's something very telling how he describes songs linked to erotic asphyxiation on Die For You and the visceral nature of sex and his own appetites that he might question on Run Me Through, but then he follows them with intimate, plain-spoken moments of tenderness on Braid and especially Alan, a playful final moment where he considered hiding or maybe venturing beyond, but he stayed for his boyfriend. And maybe that's the moment of shapeless transcendence. That's where it's achieved. Not in moving past the body, but finding one's comfort within it against another, where the presence and atmosphere of love can lead to a connection so inexplicable. It might seem like when it comes from that other side, now it's just all the more real and tangible. Again, there's a part of me that's a little bit in awe of this record. The melodies, they're stunning. The production has this heavenly swell and power while never suffocating in its own decadence. And while Mike Hadreas has always sought to reclaim the gaze that's cast upon him, No Shape more than ever finds him accepting intimate comforts and harder truths that are anchored in a performance that yearns for that peace. It can be an intense listen, don't get me wrong, but the drama is so justly earned by one of the most intensely compelling singers working today, and songs that can be just as anthemic to earn it. In short, this is an incredible piece of music, netting a 9 out of 10 from me and the highest of my recommendations. It's personal but universal, transcendent but intensely intimate, and very, very human. No Shape, it's spellbinding, and you all need to hear it. Check this out, it's worth it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know I raved about this album, and seriously, I want you to buy it. Links in the description below. But I got the poll up here. I'm curious where Perfume Genius fans fall on this. I know some of them have gotten a little bit stingy about how grand a lot of his instrumentation is, but again, when it's this beautiful, I can't really question how anybody could dislike it. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in my Patreon, the link to that is right there. Now, 3 times a week, you guys get to vote on my schedule, so hopefully albums like this get up there faster. And once per week, you guys get to add records to my schedule if you're in the higher tiers. More details right there, but until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.